Le pouvoir a organisé les jeunes en milice, interahamwe, ceux qui attaquent ensemble, et impuzamugambi, ceux qui sont unis par le même but, qui ont été des instruments redoutables, le fer de lance d'exécution du génocide. Les lieux, jadis sacrés, comme des églises, sont devenus de vrais abattoirs, parfois avec la participation directe et la complicité des responsables religieux. Ce fut le cas pour des paroisses catholiques d'Ondera, Nyange, Sainte-Famille et Saint-Paul, Kabgayi, Byimana, Nyundo, Kretzaïrenir, Mubuga, Kaduha, Gatagara, Nyanza, Sovu, Shangi, Hanika, Nyamasheke, Kibeho, Butare, Muganza et encore. Même dans des paroisses d'obédience protestante, comme Shyogwe, Kirinda, Nyakizu, Gitwe, Mugonero, Gihundwe et j'en passe. L'une des particularités du génocide de Tutsi est donc celle d'avoir réussi à impliquer les responsables de toutes les couches de la population, y compris les plus instruits et les plus pieux. Le génocide a été arrêté par le Front patriotique rwandais le 4 juillet 1994 avec la prise de Kigali. Le pays était exsangue. Le gouvernement d'union nationale s'est attelé à bâtir la paix sociale en recourant à la synergie de tous les acteurs. La justice était posée comme un préalable à l'unité nationale. Depuis l'indépendance du Rwanda, en effet, le Rwanda n'avait jamais adopté une loi sanctionnant le crime de génocide. Il fallait donc rompre avec cette culture de l'impunité. La loi portant répression du génocide et crimes contre l'humanité a été votée le 30 août 1996 pour juger les suspects. Le nombre important de personnes jugées et autres problèmes post-génocide ont conduit aux consultations populaires entre 1998 et 1999 à la présidence de la République, lesquelles ont conclu à l'instauration des juridictions gacaca pour comprendre l'ampleur du problème qui existait. Au 31 décembre 2002, c'est un exemple, le nombre de détenus emprisonnés pour génocide était de 104 143 personnes, alors que des détenus de droit commun étaient de 12 322. Leur jugement juste et équitable dans un délai raisonnable, suivant la procédure pénale classique, était donc impossible. D'où le recours à notre culture de résolution des conflits pour adopter gacaca, qui a donné des résultats louables à la justice du génocide. Au niveau international, l'ONU a créé le tribunal pénal international pour le Rwanda le 8 novembre 1994. Malgré des fautes et manquements graves de ce tribunal, il a réalisé quelques acquis jurisprudentiels importants qui ont permis l'établissement de la vérité sur le génocide. D'abord, la décision du 2 septembre 1998 dans le premier jugement concernant Jean-Paul Akayesu, qui fut d'une portée historique irrévocable. Les juges, conduits par le magistrat sénégalais Fera Itikama, ont établi la matérialité spécifique du génocide perpétré contre les Tutsis en rejetant les arguments irresponsables de la défense qui prétendaient qu'il y avait eu une guerre civile au Rwanda, pas un génocide. Voici les conclusions. Il apparaît clairement que les massacres survenus au Rwanda en 1994 visaient un objectif déterminé, celui d'exterminer les Tutsis, choisis spécialement en raison de leur appartenance au groupe ethnique Tutsi, et non pas parce qu'ils étaient des combattants du FPR. C'est un génocide qui a été commis au Rwanda en 1994 contre les Tutsis en tant que groupe, ont-ils conclu. Le 16 juin 2006 est une autre date mémorable à laquelle le TPIR a pris une importante décision de stopper net le négationnisme qui sévissait au sein même du tribunal, en consacrant, je cite, que le génocide commis contre les Tutsis est un fait de notoriété publique qui ne doit plus être contesté. Ce fut une victoire de la vérité sur le mensonge que les génocidaires et leurs complices espéraient utiliser longtemps. Ce fut pour de bon un clou planté à jamais dans le cercueil des négationnistes. L'autre grand mérite du TPIR est celui d'avoir établi une jurisprudence internationale désormais révocable et devenue une règle impérative du droit selon laquelle le viol et les violences sexuelles infligées aux femmes tutsis relèvent du crime de génocide. Les femmes, témoins et survivantes du génocide, ont été extrêmement courageuses pour tenir devant les accusés et les avocats, leur dire droit dans les yeux ce qui ne se dit pas dans la culture du Rwanda, l'atrocité du viol. Ce chemin fut un calvaire pour elles au regard des humiliations qu'elles ont subies au tribunal d'Arusha, mais le jugement fut un rétablissement de l'honneur des femmes violées pendant le génocide. Le chemin fut très périlleux quand on se souvient du scandale qui a marqué l'humiliation d'une des femmes violées, Teya, dans le procès Shalom Ntahobari. Son avocat kenyan, maître Duncan Mwanyumba, a posé des questions choquantes d'une violente cruauté à la victime, dont les suivantes. Est-ce que Shalom a retiré tous les habits que vous portiez? Est-ce que vous avez gardé votre jupe ou a-t-elle été aussi enlevée? Après cela, vous étiez nu. Décrivez ce qui s'est passé ensuite. Qu'a-t-il fait? Vous rappelez-vous quand vous avez pris votre dernière douche? Étaient-ce les conditions dans lesquelles Shalom vous a trouvé cette dernière nuit? Est-ce que Shalom a utilisé les préservatifs? Diriez-vous que dans les conditions dans lesquelles vous vous trouviez, n'ayant pas pris de douche, vous sentiez mauvais? Les juges n'ont pas arrêté ces propos indignes, faisant même le scandale d'en rire, sans retenue, devant l'attitude désespérée du témoin victime. Leur devoir de réserve, d'impartialité et de protection des témoins était totalement oublié. Ces humiliations de témoins sont fréquentes dans les procès de génocidaires à l'étranger, notamment en Belgique. Les témoins sont traités de menteurs alors qu'ils parlent des crimes qu'ils ont subis. Il importe cependant de saluer le courage de certains membres du parquet qui ont rempli leur devoir de justice avec brio. Dans le procès à Kayessou, sans la fermeté de Pierre-Richard Prosper, représentant du procureur dans ce procès, l'issue n'aurait certainement pas été la même. Passons maintenant au secteur de la presse. Dès 1990, il y a des journalistes qui ont fait le devoir d'informer la presse nationale libre et autres, et la presse internationale ont publié des articles dénonçant le risque de génocide et décrivant la nature criminelle du pouvoir rwandais. Ils ont notamment appelé la France à cesser tout appui à ce régime sans être entendu. Quelques exemples. Le quotidien français L'Humanité du 22 novembre 1991 démontrait l'excès de zèle de l'armée française au Rwanda en ces termes. Paris est complice. Face aux forces du Front patriotique rwandais, les militaires français envoyés en octobre 1990 sous éternel prétexte de défendre la vie de nos ressortissants assurent l'encadrement de l'armée gouvernementale. Ce sont des officiers français qui conduisent les interrogatoires musclés des combattants du FPR. Des articles similaires furent publiés dans l'Humanité de 13 mars 1992 et 28 février 1993, en dénonçant, je cite, les tueurs du général Habyarimana et la stratégie de massacre des populations adoptée par le régime pour faire échouer les négociations de paix d'Arusha. Le journal Libération du 11 juin 1992 lança la même alerte en ces termes. À Bruxelles, l'opposition rwandaise s'est concertée avec le FPR Constatant leur commune volonté de mettre fin au combat et de former un gouvernement d'union nationale. Or, le président Habyarimana et son entourage affairiste ne sont pas contraints de s'y résigner tant que la France alimente leur guerre contre les revanchards Tutsis. Libération du 9 février 1993 reprit la même sonnette d'alarme, cette fois-ci en évoquant ouvertement un génocide en cours, je cite. Dans les lointaines collines du Rwanda, la France soutient un régime qui, depuis 2 ans, avec ses milices et des escadrons de la mort, organise l'extermination de la minorité Tutsi. Ces escadrons de la mort, qui, organisés en réseau zéro par le clan du président, gèrent le génocide des Tutsis comme un service public. Fin de citation. L'événement du jeudi, représenté par Jean-François Dupaquier ici présent, du 25 juin 1992, avait dressé le même constat d'un génocide en préparation. Je cite, grand ami de François Mitterrand et de son fils Jean-Christophe, le président Juvenal Habyarimana ne cherche pas vraiment à contenir et encore moins à sanctionner les groupes fanatisés qui se sont jurés de provoquer l'extermination totale des 14% de Tutsis restants. Fin de citation. Après le génocide, mesdames, messieurs, le journaliste Patrick de Saint-Exupéry a été l'un des artisans de la documentation du génocide pour le public français peu informé sur ce drame. Il faut lui rendre un hommage pour ses ouvrages contre le négationnisme, mais aussi pour la série d'articles qu'il publia dans le quotidien Le Figaro. La première série fut lancée durant la semaine du 12 au 15 janvier 1998, avec 4 articles d'une clarté hors pair. Il a expliqué la conviction du président Mitterrand selon laquelle, je cite, un génocide en Afrique est sans importance. L'engagement des militaires et diplomates français dans un engrenage infernal au Rwanda, prenant fait et cause pour le pouvoir Hutu. Les complicités entre la gauche et la droite pendant la période de cohabitation qui commence en avril 1993. Le temps de l'hypocrisie en engageant l'armée française dans l'opération turquoise. Fin de citation. Du 1er au 9 avril 1998, Patrick de Saint-Exupéry publia une autre série de 9 articles d'une profonde pertinence, développant, je cite, la stratégie de Paris a été très influencée par les relations personnelles entre les Mitterrand et l'entourage du président Habyarimana. Les mensonges de l'État français qui a ignoré les signes avant-coureurs du génocide malgré les avertissements des diplomates et des militaires les plus lucides. Les armes du génocide, la guerre des infiltrés dans le nord-ouest, la livraison des armes après le début du génocide, les oublis
So Africa, a place where poverty and pandemic diseases are originated. The least wealthy continent per capita. The land where the only things to be found are animals, corrupted leaders, poor kids, dirty water and civil wars. People who are in need for help, donations and support, aka the NGO's motherland. For others, honestly, Africa is just a very hot, dark and sad place everyone wishes to escape one day. Well, whether you're an African or not, this thinking isn't new to you, because you have read, heard or felt the same way before. Just type the word Africa on Google right now. Turn on your TV and see what the NGOs portray. Watch movies from Hollywood. Ask your mama, friends, or ask yourself, what is Africa? Yet if you're still struggling to believe, let me ask you this. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Africa? Tell me the first thought that comes to your mind right now. Honestly, tell me right now. But what really is Africa? What is Africa? Listen, there are many theories about the name, but one that is close to the truth is Al-Kebulan. This name translates to Mother of Mankind, or according to other sources, the Garden of Eden, the place where love, peace and unity dwells. Al-Kebulan is an extremely old word. Many nations in Africa use this word, including Ethiopians, Nubians, Moors and Numidians. For me, this isn't just the theory, but the truth. My truth I choose to believe in. As cliche as it sounds, that's the future I'm hoping for. The tomorrow I'm fully determined to see. The dream I am convinced and dedicated to fighting for until it happens. What is Africa for you?
So the lie began from the very beginning of time, right? And I can ask you one question right now. What does history tell us here about Africa? Who discovered Africa? If you write right now on Google who discovered Africa, you find out that is one white man that he came and discovered Africa. And you can ask yourself that how can you discover a place that already exists? How can you discover a place?
Aux frontières du Rwanda, en République démocratique du Congo, les mêmes tueurs de 1994, erreurs recrues, sont hébergés et soutenus par l'État congolais et continuent leurs crimes. Élevez votre voix. Il ne peut pas y avoir de mémoire véritable si les crimes qui ont versé le sang se poursuivent 30 ans après. Je vous souhaite de fructueux échanges.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre, pour ce rappel de faits têtus et indéniables et surtout ses contributions.
Voilà, nous allons avoir avec ce premier panel, nous allons donc avoir des gens qui ont joué un rôle important ici au Rwanda et au niveau international pour rechercher la justice et préserver, n'est-ce pas, la mémoire donc, de ce génocide contre les Tutsis. Je voudrais maintenant Monsieur Éric Gillet, Madame Michelle Hirsch, Dr Charles Adéogun Phillips et Madame Karine Bordier. Docteur Doris, vous avez la parole. Merci. Votre Excellence, Madame la Première Dame, Mesdames et Messieurs, distingués invités et chers panélistes, nous vous remercions pour nous être rassemblés pour la 30e commémoration du génocide contre les Tutsis. Cette commémoration est une opportunité d'avoir des discussions sur le devoir de justice et de protection de la vérité. C'est avec honneur et humilité que je suis ici votre modératrice pour cette conversation. Ensemble, aujourd'hui, nous rencontrons pour reconnaître les contributions importantes des personnes qui ont dédié leur vie à la restauration de la justice et à l'établissement de la redevabilité dans ce génocide contre les Tutsis. Ils se sont levés à de grands risques pour défendre la justice, la vérité et la réconciliation. Nos panélistes estimés vont nous présenter donc des instruments juridiques pour, n'est-ce pas, la justice pour les
So the lie began from the very beginning of time, right? And I can ask you one question right now. What does history tell us about Africa? Who discovered Africa? If you write right now on Google who discovered Africa, you find out that it's one white man that he came and discovered Africa. And you can ask yourself that how can you discover a place that already exists? How can you discover a place that people already live in that place? It is impossible, but that's what the history tells us. That's what people believe about Africa, that it was discovered by a white man. This guy, he came, and then he went back, he gave a report, and then the next we know is colonialism, because those guys, they sat somewhere to divide Africa like a piece of cake, because they discovered it, they own it, it belonged to them. But that is us. We discovered, we're the first people to know. And today you have a lot of people around the world that they think that Africa was discovered by them.
On hot days in the savannas, preys take time to mock their predators. These zebras have just found a sleeping lion, but instead of fleeing for their lives, a strange behavior comes to display. They stand and stare. After all, what is this life if full of cares? We have no time to stand and stare. Even a mother brings her calf to the sightseeing party. They stare, move to a better angle, and stare some more. And once they've had their fill, they walk on, leaving room for other zebra tourists to close in. It's a calculated risk, however. They know a lone male lion on a hot day is as good as a useless pile of lazy meat that is better off sleeping. For today, they have other things to fear, but this cut is a sightseeing treat.
Ikiganiro mugikurikiye kuri Radio 10 ndetse na Royal FM.
113 kilometers northwest of Arusha, in the East African Rift Valley system, lies one of the world's most extreme environments teeming with odds-defying life. Per hour. Their 5-centimeter eyes are the largest of any land animal, and their cheeks the largest of any bird. A hatchling can be as big as a grown-up chicken. Ostriches lay their eggs in communal nests. The females incubate the eggs by day, and the males by night. Their coloration is such that the male will blend with the darkness by night and the female with the sun by day, giving them a perfect camouflage for incubation. As a habit, ostriches ingest stones and gravels to help in their digestion. On average, one ostrich carries over 1 kilo of stones in one of its 3 stomachs.
This right here is the white frog. Those Kihansi toads. This is one of them. And I just found it on the top of the mountain. Chungai mountain. So crazy. I was hunting for Chungai rock paintings, and on the way I almost stepped on it and I said, wow, this is one of those golds. Like, this nearly went to extinction, and they say they're only found at Kihansi in Tanzania. But funny enough, today I found it in Dodoma, Kondoa, at Chungai, on top of the mountain. So beautiful, isn't it?
The geopolitics of the world never got crazier. This is the most craziest place on earth, because this is the portion of land which is owned by absolutely no one. Like, this is the land which is independent. It's not yet colonized, it's not owned by any state. You see, Egypt has some claims to the land of Sudan, and Sudan has claims to the land of Egypt. And if any of the two nations claim this land, they will have to lose all other claims to their neighbor. Like Egypt will have to lose their claims to Sudan, and Sudan will have to lose their claim to Egypt if they take this land. And this land is really not that productive. It's really a desert place. So they chose not to claim it. So this is the only portion in the world which is owned by absolutely no one. And today, I declare that this is Mansfield Kingdom.
So the lie began from the very beginning of time, right? And I can ask you one question right now. What does history tell us you about Africa? Who discovered Africa? If you write right now on Google who discovered Africa, you find out that is one white man that he came and discovered Africa. And you can ask yourself that how can you discover a place that already exists? How can you discover a place that people already live in that place? It is impossible, but that's what the history tells us. That's what people believe about Africa, that it was discovered by a white man. This guy, he came, and then he went back, he gave a report, and then the next we know is colonialism, because those guys, they sat somewhere to divide Africa like a piece of cake, because they discovered it, they own it, it belonged to them. But that is us. We discovered, we're the first people to know. And today you have a lot of people around the world that they think that Africa was discovered by them.
And during that time, we were able to draw lessons, especially in the way people could respond to the process, to see how the Inyangamugayo judges would carry themselves. And also, we also had to watch the response of the international community that was not favorable to this process. After the pilot phase, the Gacaca courts, we had an amendment of the law. Actually, the law was completely modified because the major issue was the issue of now the courts were established, but they were not accessible. And the law was adopted in 2004, and it brought back the Gacaca courts in the community. And we had actually a Gacaca court in each sector in cell, and we had a Gacaca court at the sector level, for the first degree crimes. And there was another appeal Gacaca court that would take appeals and other, appeals for revision of the proceedings. Now, regarding the functioning of the Gacaca courts, activities were organized in 3 levels. The first step was the collection of information regarding the genocide, regarding the planning of the genocide, the way the genocide was committed in each cell. And after collecting all that information, the Gacaca court had to prepare the case law, prepare those the cases. And I would like to remind you that the Gacaca courts were not competent to judge, the first category cases that included the planners of the genocide at all levels, the organizers of the genocide, including those who committed rape and sexual violences. So that those people were actually for the higher level case. And for the second category, the Gacaca courts was to try the citizens, the people who wounded intentionally, and the cases of the third category, that were the cases of assets that had been damaged
So the lie began from the very beginning of time, right? And I can ask you one question right now. What does history tell? So the lie began from the very beginning of time, right? And I can ask you one question right now. What does history tell you about Africa? Who discovered Africa? If you write right now on Google who discovered Africa, you find out that is one white man that he came and discovered Africa. And you can ask yourself that how can you discover a place that already exists? How can you discover a place that people already live in that place? It is impossible, but that's what the history tells us. That's what people believe about Africa, that it was discovered by a white man. This guy, he came, and then he went back, he gave a report, and then the next we know is colonialism, because those guys, they sat somewhere to divide Africa like a piece of cake, because they discovered it, they own it, it belonged to them. But that is us. We discovered, we're the first people to know. And today you have a lot of people around the world that they think that Africa was discovered by them.
Okay, let me tell you this, guys. Darkness has no power. Darkness has no power at all. Like darkness, it has no power. Why? If you're in the deep darkness, all right, you don't see anything. You don't see where you're going. You don't see what is next to you. And then you just turn light. In 1 second, that darkness disappears. So do you understand the importance of light in the midst of darkness? Okay, on the other hand, if you have light, it doesn't matter how much there's a deep darkness, it doesn't matter, but you always see something as long as there's a light. This is to tell you that, guys, in the midst of darkness, there's these bright moments that happen, and our job is to focus on that. Sometimes, you know, there'll be a time we'll talk about the issues and everything and the struggles that are happening and how can we get over this, and there'll be a time that we channel our energy and we channel our hearts to something good that is happening. So Africa, a place where poverty and pandemic diseases are originated. The least wealthy continent per capita. The land where the only things to be found are animals, corrupted leaders, poor kids, dirty water and civil wars. People who are in need for help, donations and support, aka the NGO's motherland. For others, honestly, Africa is just a very hot, dark and sad place everyone wishes to escape one day. Well, whether you're an African or not, this thinking isn't new to you, because you have read, heard or felt the same way before. Just type the word Africa on Google right now. Turn on your TV and see what the NGOs portray. Watch movies from Hollywood. Ask your mama, friends, or ask yourself, what is Africa? Yet if you're still struggling to believe, let me ask you this. What comes to your mind when you hear the word Africa? Tell me the first thought that comes to your mind right now. Honestly, tell me right now. But what really is Africa? What is Africa? Listen, there are many theories about the name, but one that is close to the truth is Alkebulan. This name translates to Mother of Mankind, or according to other sources, the Garden of Eden, the place where love, peace and unity dwells. Alkebulan is an extremely old word. Many nations in Africa use this word, including Ethiopians, Nubians, Moors and Numidians. For me, this isn't just the theory, but the truth. My truth I choose to believe in. As cliche as it sounds, that's the future I'm hoping for. The tomorrow I'm fully determined to see. The dream I am convinced and dedicated to fighting for until it happens. What is Africa for you?
On hot days in the savannas, preys take time to mock their predators. These zebras have just found a sleeping lion, but instead of fleeing for their lives, a strange behavior comes to display. They stand and stare. After all, what is this life if full of cares? We have no time to stand and stare. Even a mother brings her calf to the sightseeing party. They stare, move to a better angle, and stare some more. And once they've had their fill, they walk on, leaving room for other zebra tourists to close in. It's a calculated risk, however. They know a lone male lion on a hot day is as good as a useless pile of lazy meat that is better off sleeping. For today, they have other things to fear, but this cut is a sightseeing treat.
That's when we started an international investigation. There could be maybe some were able to realize that we found out that people were killed and put in pits all over that region in the north of this country. And the images were shared across the world, and we went to the garden of the Kinigi Burgmeister. We tried to, and we showed the images, and I can see our experts working in a documentary that will be published by France 5 next Sunday. It is called Rwanda vers l'Apocalypse. That is actually a documentary that shows, the preparations towards the genocide. So that international investigating team worked on the massacres of the Bagogwe, which we even qualified as genocide crimes. What we did in addition was to update the way massacres were being committed in the country, with significant massacres in Bugesera, whereby for the first time we saw all these actors all over the country during the genocide, the media, the public institutions, all the decentralized institutions, the sector, the commune. We could see, how the Interahamwe were transported because they were already there at that time. So the Interahamwe were being transported towards from one region to another region, so that they can actually commit massacres. And we realized that all over the country, it took place the same way. We realized that the massacres were following the, administrative boundaries. So if a bookmaster is involved in the massacres, he would help, the bookmaster of the neighboring commune. And for the first time, we saw that document, which we saw when we came to Rwanda for the first time, that it was the document from the army that defined the enemy. So that is a very important document during the genocide, because we saw that after that at the International Criminal Court and in Germany, in France, in Belgium, so the enemy was defined, and that document was used to commit the genocide. And when we analyzed that document in our report, and we saw that it was important to understand what was happening in Rwanda.
Vos enquêtes.
So it's based on the investigations you carried out before the genocide that actually was used, and that's what you used to sensitize the public in Belgium. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What were the stakes with the first trials and the challenges you had to overcome? The fact that we dealt the genocide allowed us to follow the genocide and to be conscious of what was happening. And once again, with the Rwandans in Belgium, particularly Gassan Ndoba, who is here today, and thanks to him, we managed to do this work before the genocide, and also during the genocide, we tried to see, was there something that can be done at the legal level? We drafted complaints, and we also worked with the Dr. Eric David, who works with us, used his expertise in humanitarian law. So we drafted the first complaints, and we submitted these complaints to the prosecutor in Belgium even before the end of the genocide. At that time, this was an action that was a bit desperate. We had no experience in terms of prosecuting mass crimes, and we were not kidding ourselves. So the stakes here, something had to be done, something had to be said so that trials can take place. So this was the initial objective. And it was difficult because Belgium is today considered as one of the first countries to prosecute mass crimes that involve massacres, because Belgium has universal competence. So we used this law on universal competence, which was new in Belgium. It actually was adopted in 1993. So although Belgium was one of the first countries to use this law, it was not easy. We first of all had to face the lack of movement on the side of the legislators. We did a press conference where we accused the Minister of Justice to be an accomplice of the Interahamwe's, and this infuriated him. And following that, he said, since to prove that I am not an accomplice of the Interahamwe, I am going to appoint a prosecutor to appoint a prosecutor, and we found ourselves with a judge called, that I think everybody knows him, who said, "I accept these responsibilities, but my only condition is that I require a team of investigators full time. I need to work on this full time." And a few weeks later, he was able to issue arrest warrants. You were also you also worked on the fight of the inclusion of rape as a war crime and a crime of genocide. Can you tell us what led you to this aspect? What are the obstacles that you faced, and what were of some of the successes, if we might use this word? Okay, so yeah, this is a huge question. I would like to first of all say that I am very emotional, touched to be here in the presence of Her Excellency, the First Lady, but in your presence, all of you, it is my honor to have been invited to find myself here 30 years after the genocide. So I'm only here, I'm on this panel thanks to Eric Gillet. We met in 1995. He had already done the press conference where he accused the Minister of Justice of being an accomplice of the Interahamwe, and this judge had already issued the judge that was appointed subsequently had already issued arrest warrants. And so, but at that time, there was no one wanted to include rape as a war crime and a crime of genocide. Now, there were two people. One person was detained in Belgium, and the other one was detained in Arusha. Now, these two people, well, in the beginning, we had the first difficulty that we had was the following. We faced the first obstacle was the fact that the Belgian prosecution wanted to free the Rwandan detainee, arguing that there was no element in the file that justified his continued detention. And we had a hearing, and I remember there was a lot of emotions, a closed-door hearing in the Chambre de Conseil, where thanks to the magistrate that was present, this case was sent for trial. So what happened? I'm underlining this anecdote because it is thanks to the intervention of the magistrates that we're here today, after having participated in 6 trials before the Cour d'Assises of Belgium. So there were elements in the case that could send this case for trial. It could be sent to criminal court instead of more serious case with a jury. So we pleaded and we made our submissions, and the president of the chamber issued an ordinance without any conclusion, without any element, sending this case to the criminal courts. Thanks to this case was sent back to criminal court, and it is only 5 years later, in 2001, due to the attitude of the prosecution, which was blocking this case. So we fought a lot, and thanks to the intervention of some magistrates, we managed to carry out the first trial. The other intervention that I would like to talk about is the fact that everything is based on the courage of the victims and their families. Without them, without all the teamwork that we managed to carry out at all levels, at the level of proof, burden of proof, in terms of testimonies, without all this, we wouldn't be here today.
The témoignages des victimes,
The Minister Bizimana talked about how some witnesses were treated in some trials. Was that also your experience in Belgium? That victims, rape victims who are courageous, who come forward, were humiliated? So, well, first I would like to say that in the first trial, the word rape is nowhere. There are thousands of pages in the case, but the word rape is not invoked once. The reality of systematic rape that was executed during the genocide. We're talking about 300 and 500,000 victims. I was the lawyer of rape victims. I worked for associations like SOS Rape. I've been working on this for several years. So when we came to Rwanda to prepare the case of the 4 from Butare, it was a shock for me to be faced with victims that talked.
du moins dans ce que je pensais.
After the Shoah, victims didn't talk. Here, they talked. They expressed themselves. The friends who are here today, they were telling us what happened. What were they telling us? They were telling us what happened to their brothers, to their husbands, their fathers, their sons, their daughters. And I had not realized at that time that the women that I had met, they did not talk about what happened to them. They did not talk about the rape that most of them had had faced.
Parce qu'on
So during this first trial that I mentioned, the four from Butare, we did not take the rape element into consideration. We were not ready. We did not expect this. It is not until the Kibungo process, through the assistance of through a testimony of a man
c'est cet homme-là
who testified in front of other women who told us about the rape. Once this man did that, we started seeing the reality of the systematic rapes that were carried out during the genocide. Also, rape that was carried out before the genocide with total impunity.
pré-génocidaire
With a genocidal ideology that aimed specifically at women, Tutsi women. The propaganda, the 10 Commandments of Hutus.
aux femmes.
The first 3 articles of the 10 Commandments are. So that is when we started to bring in testimonies.
Il faudra attendre.
And expertise, and one had to wait until the trial of Kezabera. I think it was in 2009. That for the first time, Kezabera was prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity, and crimes of genocide. Kezabera was gravely ill. Kezabera admitted to everything except one thing: the rapes. For the rape, he had a theory.
Le consentement des victimes.
He mentioned and he said that the victims were consenting. He was sentenced to 30 years. He appealed, but he subsequently died. So technically, he died as not guilty. There's also the case at Kwahigwa, who was prosecuted at this trial ended last December. After 2 months of trial, he was sentenced to a life sentence, the first of a kind in Belgium. He was prosecuted for rape before the genocide, rape during the genocide committed by himself and Interamoes who were under his orders. And he was sentenced thanks to the testimonies of victims. There were a lot of women who had the courage to testify. Otherwise, sometimes it's in a public hearing because the rules in criminal court, the debates should be public. Thanks to the victims and their courage, the jury understood through the testimonies the genocidal rape. I'm using this term, although international law does not have a provision of genocidal rape. There are crimes against humanity, crimes of war, there is no provision for genocide, rape, but the motivation of the criminal court was extraordinary because the jury heard the silence of the women during the rape. Because in front of the court, the women could not express these things for themselves, but you could hear them. Although they were silent, you could hear them. So the accused was sentenced on all the counts that he was charged of. Thank you very much for this fight that you undertook for the Rwandan women who were victims. Now, Maître Bordier in France, the Survie organization, which was engaged in fighting in having the genocide of Tutsi recognized and the role of France. And you started this work in 1994. So I would like you to tell us briefly the story of this association with the Bisesero case. I'm going to try. There's a lot of work done in terms of collaboration, but Survie has a specificity. Its main purpose is to fight against the concept of France-Afrique. So what is clear is that since even before the genocide of 1994, since 1993, the president of Survie at that time, Jean Carbonard, had carried out investigations and had testified in France 2, where he explained what he saw. I think that was an important moment to explain, to understand the intervention of Survie.
Qui lutte pour la reconnaissance du génocide des Tutsis.
To understand the work of Survie, who is fighting during that time. So that is end of January 1993. I don't think a lot of people saw this, but the conference, these images are accessible online. Jean Carbonard, who was the president of Survie at that time, a man of 67, 68 years old, who comes back from this investigation and who was totally devastated from what he saw. And he was one of the first stakeholder in this fight. But he was also one of the first to see things clearly. So when we don't understand something, we can't name them, vice versa, and vice versa. So what we see in those images that I'm mentioning, following this investigation by the International Federation of Human Rights and the Association Survie, Jean Carbonard was clearly saying things in January 1993. So that was 15 months before April 1994 and before the start of the genocide. And when he was naming things clearly, you know, there is something very specific in the French language. There's a term to say when you've lost a parent, your parents, you're an orphan. There's a term to say when you have lost a spouse, you're a widow or widower. But there's no term there's no term to say, to name somebody who has lost his or her children. Maybe because it's something that cannot be said, it's something that is inconceivable. Jean Carbonard came to television during this interview, and he talked about what he saw, what he heard, about the testimonies of women who lost all their children. And he said two things were very important, and this also underlies the action of Survie afterwards. He said two things. First of all, it's already a genocide. So basically, he is already using the right term. This is already genocide, crime against humanity, ethnic purification. This is very important because he is mentioning this to the French public, and at that time, it will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of time before. It will take many years for the French authorities to actually say this word. And the second thing he said was, "We are all responsible." He said, France has assisted militarily and financially the regime which is implementing the point of something that from that moment, this was an aspect that became crucial for the work of Survie. And in the statutes of Survie, one of the things that we're focusing on is we have to find all the elements necessary to show the responsibility of the French state in the genocide. Dr.
Being here with us, and you bring a more international perspective with your experience. You were lead international prosecutor and head of special investigations, and in your capacity as prosecutor, you led 12 precedent-setting genocide trials and obtained 12 convictions against 13 defendants. Can you just paint us a picture of these early days of the ICTR and the highlights and challenges that were faced?
Thank you. I am extremely honored to be invited back to Rwanda. I first set foot on the shores of Rwanda 26 years ago. At the time, I'd barely been married for a year. My wife was expecting our first child, and I had no reason to expect that my sojourn in Rwanda would last more than 6 months. It eventually lasted 12 and a half years. Let me start off by saying that without any precedent to follow since Nuremberg, the ICTR irreversibly changed the entire landscape of international criminal law as concerns the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. But more importantly, also the modes of criminal liability that defendants are charged with thereof, superior responsibility and individual criminal responsibility. There was no precedent for the work that we did. And when the minister was speaking earlier, and my colleague from the Gacaca process, I was very quickly able to identify with many of the comments because there was no experienced genocide prosecutor in January 1998 when I landed in Kigali. There was no terribly experienced genocide investigator. Why? Well, for obvious reasons. The Genocide Convention of 1948 only existed on paper. It never been put to use. So we were all learning, regardless of where we came from, regardless of our legal background, be it from the civil law system or the common law system, be you African, British, American, Canadian, and there were a handful of us here. No one had ever done this before. So there were bound to be challenges. There were bound to be criticisms, but you needed to have been in our shoes to understand the challenge, the humongous challenge that we were faced with. And I've divided some of those challenges. Now I'm looking back 26 years when I first started this work as a young 32-year-old rookie lawyer. I probably had been a lawyer for 4 years when I landed in Kigali. And I've divided these challenges into 3 parts: institutional challenges, procedural challenges, and practical challenges. I only have 20 minutes to speak to you this afternoon, and I will try to address those 3 challenges in that time, with a lot of difficulty, of course. The first institutional challenge that we as prosecutors faced was this: who bore the greatest responsibility for the genocide? Why did we face this challenge? Because the preamble, the statute of the ICTR, reserved the investigation and prosecution that the tribunal was dealing with only for the ring leaders. We were never interested in the foot soldiers. And you've just heard talk being made about 6,000 cases in the local gacaca system. Well, we needed to have the gacaca system because we were not going to deal with more than a handful of 70 indictees. In fact, at the end of the day, I think we dealt with just over 70, or maybe 80. 62 of them were convicted for genocide and crimes against humanity. Of those 62 individuals, as you heard, my team and I obtained the convictions of 12 of them. So 20% of the tribunal's work we undertook with great success. Now, in determining those who bore the greatest responsibility for the genocide, quite a few things were considered. Their position in government or in the military, their status, the geographical region that they emerged from. I was leading 2 areas. In those days, we called them prefectures in Rwanda. I led the prosecutions from the Kibuye prefecture in those days and the Bugesera region, the Kigali Rural prefecture. If anybody knows anything about the genocide, you'd very quickly realize that those were the 2 main areas in Rwanda that suffered the highest casualties during the genocide: Kibuye and the Bugesera region. And in determining those who bore the greatest responsibility for the attacks on Tutsis in those regions, there were a foray and a myriad of considerations that had to go in. Do we go after the military? Do we go after the religious leaders? Do we go after the political leaders? Do we go after the local leadership? And even if we go after the leadership, at what level of strata did we want to go after those people? The second challenge related to apprehending suspects. And closely tied to apprehending suspects was the issue of state cooperation. Now, we all know that international tribunals don't have police forces of their own. We have no law enforcement powers. So we ultimately have to rely on the cooperation of member states in the UN and in the world to help us arrest the fugitives. Well, we know the story that not all the countries in the region were interested in supporting our work in relation to arresting fugitives. The ICTY in the former Yugoslavia was no exception. But when we finally overcame that challenge, one of the highlights of the ICTR, as opposed to the ICTY, was this. Unlike the ICTY, the ICTR was terribly successful at apprehending the top echelons of Rwandan leadership and not the foot soldiers. We actually succeeded in arresting the ringleaders. The ICTY was not that successful at the beginning. Towards the end, they got the leadership in and they started with the foot soldiers. We always had the leadership. So one of the very first detainees that we had in Arusha was Clement Kaishima, Obedru Zindana, Dr. Elisafani Takuturomana. Alfred Musema joined them shortly afterwards, and the like. Now, we had some challenges in relation to gender-specific crimes. And a lot has been said about this. But unfortunately, the reality of life and wars is that wars are not only fought on battlefields, but they're also, unfortunately and sadly, fought on the bodies of women. Now, we came across quite a few challenges in this, and I identify with one of my panelists when she seemed to suggest that there existed a culture of silence. But before we start to talk about the culture of silence, one of my experiences in investigating and preparing for the prosecution of Mika Muimana, which I led in 2004 rather. The Mika Muimana case had to do with a serial rapist. And one of the witnesses that we had shortlisted in that case had given a very robust statement about her witnessing the rapes of other women. And when I went to see her with my assistants and my team, I then asked her a very obvious question. Well, Madam, how was it that you were able to witness all these rapes occurring without you being raped yourself? At the time, I had a young colleague by the name Florida Kabasinga. Florida had been my intern when I prosecuted the Intakitu Romana case 3 years before. She had now come back to the tribunal as a fully fledged staff member. And for the first time in the prosecutions, I had the benefit of having a native Kenya-Rwanda speaker. For some reason, this woman felt very comfortable with Florida. And when I asked her that question, she turned and looked at Florida and said, "Can I be honest with you?" So I looked at Florida and I said, "What's she saying?" And she goes, "Calm down." And then she said to Florida in Kenya, Rwanda, "Actually, I was raped." I noticed Florida's countenance changed. And I'm not understanding what they're talking about. I'm looking at it. What's going on here? This is calm down. So she calls me aside and says, Actually, Charles, she was raped. When I she was? Well, why didn't she say? Can I ask her? She says, yes, you can. So I went back and I sat down with her. Says, Madam, why do we have a witness statement that doesn't mention the fact that you were raped? Again, she turns to Florida, almost like seeking approval. Should I answer? And then she says, when the investigators came to interview me, and they interviewed me 3 times, they were all men. They were all male investigators. And I didn't feel comfortable talking to men about being raped. Now, we had gone there with a team full of ladies, by the way, not knowing what had happened during the investigation. That already tells me one of the challenges about investigating gender-specific crimes. But she didn't stop there. Her pseudonym was AB, Witness AB. Witness AB then spoke to me through my assistant and said, actually, I am ready to testify about the fact that I was raped, but on one condition. And that condition is, you tell Mr. Prosecutor that I will testify about my own rape so long as he can guarantee me that my husband, my new husband, my present husband, who I never told about being raped, will never find out. I looked at Florida and very quickly I said, yes, I know we have the most robust witness protection measures at the tribunal. And we have beautiful rules that protect witnesses and give them pseudonyms. But that was one guarantee that I was not willing to give. You know why? Because for me, it was tantamount to double jeopardy for this young Tutsi woman that had managed to rebuild her life many years after the genocide, found a man who showed interest in her, loved her, married her. And for me, in one fell swoop, sitting on the lakes of Lake Kivu in Kibuye in a guest house, to take a decision that, well, yeah, I need your testimony so much. You come, I'll guarantee you. It was a risk I wasn't willing to take. So I dropped her. Painfully, I dropped her as a witness. But that experience with her showed that first, there is a culture of silence. And because there is a culture of silence, obviously, because culturally, rape is not what African women want to discuss, whether you're talking about Nigerian women or Rwandan women or Ethiopian women. Therefore, certain mechanisms have to be put in place to be able to deal with investigations and prosecution of sexual violence or rape. There are many other challenges, and I don't want to sit here, trying to compress 12 years of work into 20 minutes.
Absolutely. And if I may, when you mentioned this reluctance to speak to a male interlocutor when you're discussing issues of rape, I think it's symptomatic of one of the larger issues that were noted with the ICTR, and even to this day kind of taints its legacy. We're talking about a tribunal that was perceived here, at least in Rwanda, as being too removed from the communities that it is serving, too lengthy, too costly. Did it deliver justice? So I was wondering, in light of this experience, these 12 years you're trying to compress, and with the benefit of hindsight, looking back, do you believe the ICTR was like a perfect model, as there's some lessons that could have been learned? If you could go back, what changes would you recommend?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll tell you a little story about one of the things that made our work so delayed in the early days. The prosecutor at the time like I said, there was no precedent to what we did. So Madam Justice Abor, who was my boss from Canada at the time, had this illusion, and I tell you it was an illusion, to recreate Nuremberg. And she decided to file an indictment involving 29 defendants. Thankfully, that venture was denied by the chambers. But can you imagine the logistical and practical difficulties we would have encountered had we had 29 defendants in one tiny courtroom in Arusha? Just the defendants alone need to have space to sit, let alone their lawyers, let alone their assistants, let alone everything that comes with it. And that experiment, unique as it was, made us very quickly realize that perhaps joint trials were not terribly suited for very large-scale international crimes, and maybe the trial of single accused persons. The fallout from the attempts to indict 29 persons in one case was that indictment was broken into 7 separate cases, still involving joint defendants, 4, 3. So we had the media, government, that those joint cases took so many years to resolve because joint trials are extremely complex. If you have 6 defendants in one room and one defendant is unwell and doesn't come to court, the 5 other defendants will simply say, well, we don't want to proceed because we all have, there's so many things that can happen. Anyway, but as we went along, there were so many innovations by the judges to deal with all sorts of procedural issues. I heard somebody talk earlier, I think it was the minister, about taking judicial notice. Let me say a bit about that. In the first 3-4 cases we tried at the tribunal, everything was an issue. We had to prove the existence of genocide. Do you know what it takes to prove the existence of a genocide? It's the only crime that has the special intent to destroy in whole or in parts members of a group identified as such on religious and ethnic grounds. We had to call experts. We had to call, just imagine our inability to get that into our rules until I think it was almost 2003 when Rule 94A and Rule 94B came into the rules, primarily because of the report of the body of experts that the Security Council had asked to investigate why the cases were not moving in Arusha, came and reported and said, because they're not taking judicial notice of certain facts. Our ability to take judicial notice of certain facts helped us a lot because we didn't have to bother with having to prove the occurrence of genocide.
For a non-lawyer audience, how can you briefly explain what judicial notice is?
There were 2 aspects to it, yes. 94A would allow us to request the court to take judicial notice of certain commonly known facts. So what's a commonly known fact? Well, a commonly known fact, for example, is there existed a Tutsi group in Rwanda there existed an ethnic group in Rwanda known as Tutsi. There existed an ethnic group in Rwanda known as Twa. It's a commonly known fact. We know we don't have to call evidence in that. 94B went a step further and allowed us to ask the court to take judicial notice of previously adjudicated facts. That was the bomb. Because what that allowed us to do was to rely on previous judgments of the tribunal, either at the ICTR or at the ICTY, that had found that genocide had occurred in Rwanda. It was a previously adjudicated fact. The only proviso is that that adjudicated fact cannot be contested at any level. In other words, it had to have been resolved on appeal. So once the Akiyesu case had gone on appeal, that was already an adjudicated fact. Tutsis were targeted. Tutsis were targeted based on their ethnicity. There was a common plan in Rwanda. The plan was all over the country, and it involved action of state. Those were adjudicated facts. I no longer had to call Alison DeForge, for example, to stand in a witness box for 4 days to prove the existence of a genocide. So that in itself was very helpful in moving the process forward.
Thank you very much. And I think that's one of the very important legacies of the ICTR.
Correct.
It's that it canonized basic facts, basic truths. And even as we see of genocide denial as well, it's important to always go back to these facts that were established and determined in the ICTR. And when we speak of legacy, I would like to go back to Madame Donatil. Que pensez-vous quel était l'héritage?
What do you think about the heritage in terms of what is the inheritance of Gacaca, in terms of the liability in mass crimes for the Gacaca model? Even though we say that never again, mass atrocities continue even today. Well, they continue to be, the genocide continue to be perpetrated. We can see even, some signs of genocide in the DRC. Can you tell us if the Gacaca model can be exported? What is the heritage of Gacaca? Thank you. The heritage of Gacaca for our country, particularly, I would say that it is the end of impunity, which was actually one of the missions of Gacaca courts during the dialogue at Urugwiro village. The end of impunity. The second heritage is the success of Gacaca proved that Rwandans were masters of their own destiny. So we can be sure that we can achieve whatever we want to achieve in our country. We are able to achieve it because we want it and we know we are going to achieve it. Now, for the international community, one heritage, well, repression of genocide crimes is possible. There is not one solution on one, because those who do not support the system, they said that we needed to use the classical system or to come up with a general amnesty. But we proved that even the systems from our culture, the system that we used in, the culture can be a model to for us and for others. Now, how can we export that model? I think that is also possible. When you look at the number of visits that we have, people coming to this country to learn about how Gacaca worked, looking at the outcome of Gacaca courts, I think it is possible, but we need to adapt to the realities of each country. The cultural realities and the administrative realities, and they need to have a strong political will. Now, to conclude on this this discussion, Maître Gillet, Maître Hirsch, I would like to give the floor also to the public. We have a resurgence of denial. We have the genocide ideology. So what has been your experience from the first trials? You have seen, the evolution of that denial. Well, in the first trials, the defense were not denying. That was a defense that was, for the accused were maybe in a different location. that was not really denying defense. But in later trials, we had some kind of, genocide denial based defense, because actually it was different from the legitimacy of the court and the jury. So that was a very aggressive defense, against the testimonies of the witnesses or the victims. When the witnesses and the victims were not defending the negationist ideology. So that the defense later in the later trials was very aggressive. And in Belgium, the defense or the trial is happening with all the people there. People are there. The jury will have to judge somebody accused of genocide. And of course, that involves some vigilance. And Eric Gillet and myself, we a preliminary statement to the jury from the process in the trials in 2001. We warned the jury about what they were going to be confronted with. That they may need maybe to close their eyes, their ears, so that they could not hear, so that they could not see. Well, we warned them so that they would. There were so many challenges that would prevent them from, judging. So it was hard even for us because it was unprecedented. So we finally achieved it. Now, what is the role of a negationist defense when we have jury? The jury have heard the victims. They have heard, they leave out the testimonies, So because the jury do not have access to the documentations, they only hear and see. That's what they get. So in the last trial, the accused was convicted. So this is quite encouraging to see that people can see through all the shouts of the people in the negationists or the people who are denying the genocide. Well, I think Maître Bourrier, I know that it was really hard in France. So can you please tell us about what happened in your situation? Well, for a number of years, I've been seeing the emergence of some, denial, kind of interventions. People really freely, coming up and deny the genocide. And well, your question is quite large. Well, let me talk about the case of Bisesero. The case of Bisesero, that is a case, that depends on the of 6 survivors from that area. So these people, they actually came up and they told us how, they were abandoned by the French army. So those people heard several times, especially at the beginning of this process, they said that we thought that it was not only about the victims, that so they were. So the soldiers will say that we thought that they thought that they were rebels who are hidden. So that's how I know, we all know, we realize that all the victims today who are fighting for a number of years. So it's hard with all these years to say that we need to 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 maintain, this long process for the BCSRO case, which is long, but so we know that there are so many people who are against the evolution of this case, but each denial speech is cruel and violent. So it's so true. Maître Gillet, any closing remarks? Well, two or three regarding the denial. The reality has transpired in the third trial, in the 10 the case of assassination of the 10 Belgian soldiers. So what is worrying for me is that, there is a movement of genocide denial, and it is quite vehement. It is disorganized, violent, and it is counterproductive, and it is not credible. But for the future, I fear that a lawyer may come later on, maybe come up with, a more coherent manner of explaining it. And now the fact that we have had all these trials with the work of, the UNICTPR, with the acknowledgement of the genocide, then we can base on that. But we cannot say that this is really final. And I would like to also say that, just to concur with what Charles said regarding the role of the different actors, I have always considered that the international justice system, especially in mass crimes, this is a basis. We have the national jurisdictions, that's what Rwanda did, and the international tribunal that targets the leaders, and another category of your people who have actually done, who committed the genocide. So we have the intellectuals of that time. We have physicians, doctors, professors, lawyers. We have realized that Belgium has arrested Stanislas Mbelambona Meka. We have leaders, bankers, religious leaders. So all those people, I think national jurisdictions can do that. And because, so we can see that, other jurisdictions, national jurisdictions should carry on that work and indict those people. So we have been able to understand, all the aspects regarding these crimes. The last thing I want to say, just to answer your question, and to, when we look at the past, what should we change? Well, I have one thing I need to say: the acknowledgement of the role of the victims. So I'm sure that if the victims had been able to play the same role as in Paris and Brussels, well, some acquittals would not have taken place. Thank you.
Beaucoup pour ces remarques et pour nous faire réaliser aussi qu'on ne peut rien prendre pour acquis et que le devoir de mémoire était aussi un devoir de vigilance constante. Nous allons maintenant prendre...
That we shouldn't take anything for granted and we have to remain vigilant. We're sorry, but we don't have a lot of time, but the audience, maybe if they have a few questions for a few minutes for the panelists. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to all the panelists. My name is Dafroza Gauthier. I'd like to come back to what Dr. Charles said about the culture of silence, which cost us a lot in France in the case of Abbé Mounier Chaka. So women who had testified in this case regarding rape had to withdraw their statement. They fragilized the case, so it became very complicated. So the culture of silence, yes, something that's important. Is there someone else who has a contribution? Thank you. Dr. Augustin Shimirimana, and I am a lecturer at the University of Rwanda in clinical psychology. My question concerns the psychological aspect of a testimony and its stake. If we look at what Eugene Whittaker said, who wrote a lot about the testimonies of survivors, he has shown that the silence that you have witnessed during cases, the silence of survivors, this is a psychological challenge because psychologically speaking, these people think that they might be betrayed again, and that's why they are so silent sometimes. Yes, I've testified, but what guarantees me that the international community, which closed its eyes during the genocide and who is still investigating what happened, what tells me that the international community won't betray me again? And this is one of the obstacles of what you experienced during the different cases. And secondly, I would like to address something said by the panelist who said that the issue of finding a name for a person who lost all their children. There is no cultural terminological term. And in my research, I worked on widows, post-genocide widows, and I worked a lot with these widows, and I believe I found a term which obviously cannot summarize everything that all the widows experienced, but it's a term which was interesting, because when you're doing research on genocide, you keep learning whether we want it or not. This lady said, they castrated me. They killed all my children by myself, and they castrated me. But the concept of castration concerns the fact of cutting life. So, and this really educated me. I'm just saying that I agree that it's difficult to find a term for somebody who lost everything. So we're going to close here. I would like to thank all our panelists, and we thank you for your fight, for everything that you've brought to, everything that you've done to bring justice to the victims. We thank you very much. Thank you.
Et grand merci, Dr. Doris, pour votre modération. Voilà. Merci donc à nos panélistes, à ces guerriers de la justice, parce que, comme vous l'avez entendu, c'était une lutte. Et merci aussi aux participants qui ont contribué de leur lumière aux discussions. Nous avons parlé de silence des victimes et des rescapés, mais comme nous allons le voir dans la séance qui va suivre, il y en a qui ont brisé leur silence. Donc nous allons sortir de cette salle et aller au pavillon qui se trouvera à votre gauche. Il y aura des jeunes hommes et femmes qui vont vous guider. Et c'est là où nous allons faire le lancement du livre « Entendez-nous » du collectif Avega. For those who live with a handicap or are a bit tired, there's one bus that would be there to take you to the venue. But for all of you, young people, or those who wants to do some physical activity to, to revive your brains, we will just take 5 to 10 minutes to go to the other venue. Thank you, and please, let's get there in 10 minutes maximum. Thank you.